Do the LDS have Christians beat on this argument?
Or an anti-Mormon, or know an anti-Mormon.
I'm not an anti-Mormon. Actually, Baylie, I would say I'm a pro-Mormon because I want all Mormons to come to the truth of Jesus Christ, which just happens to be found outside of the LDS faith.
Who uses the King Follett Discourse to try to debunk Mormonism?
Alrighty, let's see what Baylie has in store.
Sit down, this video is for you. Because every time somebody pulls out the King Follett Discourse and they think it's some sort of mic drop moment, I kind of have to laugh.
Well, let's see if you're laughing after this video.
Because the King Follett Discourse is unimportant, but because of how it's used.
One day, I'm going to make a prediction. I believe you are going to be an ex-Mormon. You will be a Christian and you will have a relationship with Jesus the Christ closer than you've ever imagined possible because you're searching for truth.
First, what even is the King Follett Discourse? It was a funeral sermon given by Joseph Smith in 1844.
A sermon given by the founding prophet of your faith. Okay, let's just keep that in mind.
Never revelation for the whole church, never scripture, and of course not canonized doctrine.
Even though Joseph Smith had almost an entire year to make corrections to this sermon,
it was just a spoken sermon given at a public gathering. A very windy day. And this is true, you can look it up. This sermon does not teach that God was just some guy like one of us.
Even though Joseph Smith says exactly that.
King Follett Discourse is not canonized scripture.
So Baylie, your argument here, if you allow me to summarize briefly, you're basically saying, look, this was a sermon. It was given on a windy day. We don't even know if it's really what he said. So, it's not actual doctrine, so we can't use it to debunk LDS faith, right? Now, Baylie, hear me out here. This is super, super important. This would be a pretty decent argument if the next 70 plus years of LDS history didn't exist. You see, Baylie, and please hear me out here. Your argument has a massive, massive problem. And that is the doctrines that are espoused by Joseph Smith in the King Follett Discourse were continued to be taught for the next 70 plus years by the presidents, by the prophets of your church. They continued on the teachings. You can look it up by Brigham Young, by John Taylor, by Woodruff, by Lorenzo Snow. It wasn't until Herbert Grant in the 1920s and 30s where he began to soften the language into more of what the LDS faith currently teaches, Baylie, and what you currently believe. Your argument here only works if the Joseph Smith King Follett Discourse was just a once and done weird oddity that never got brought up again, was never taught or never proliferated in the LDS faith ever again. But that's not the reality. Baylie, this should be scary for you to hear. 19th century Mormonism was very, very different from the LDS, from the Mormon faith that you currently hold today in 2026. Baylie, I beg you, find a sweet old man or old woman in your church, maybe over the age of 80 preferably. Ask them if they so easily dismiss 70 plus years of LDS prophets teaching the same theology that Joseph Smith expounded in the King Follett Discourse. Ask them if they didn't believe that God the Father was once a man just like you and me, and that he became God just like you and I can do, eternal beings or not. Furthermore, I challenge you, speak to an FLDS. Speak to one of the splinter groups of the Mormon faith. There are many. You probably have heard of the Apostolic United Brethren, the Church of the Firstborn, and the Latter-day Church of Christ. You realize, Baylie, please hear me here. These groups splintered because they view the Mormon modern leadership as apostatizing from the faith. They think your current LDS church apostatized. Why? Because it abandoned the teachings of Joseph Smith and of Brigham Young, teachings they held dearly and they do to this day. You claim to be upholding truth. You claim to be a critical thinker, Baylie. Ask yourself, has the LDS faith ever repudiated these teachings? And ask yourself, why do these splinter groups look at your current modern LDS leadership as having apostatized from the faith. So I ask you in closing, Baylie, if the teachings of the King Follett Discourse are so dismissible, why did prophets of your church continue to teach the same thing for the next 70 plus years? Answer me that question, please. And genuinely, I ask that God bless you.
If you are an anti-Mormon or know an anti-Mormon who uses the King Follett Discourse to try to debunk Mormonism, sit down, this video is for you. Because every time somebody pulls out the King Follett Discourse and they think it's some sort of mic drop moment, I kind of have to laugh. Not because the King Follett Discourse is unimportant, but because of how it's used. First, what even is the King Follett Discourse? It was a funeral sermon given by Joseph Smith in 1844. Never revelation for the whole church, never scripture, and of course not canonized doctrine. It was just a spoken sermon given at a public gathering. Which brings me to point number 2. Did you know that when Joseph Smith spoke at the sermon, it took over 2 hours? And if you read the King Follett Discourse in its entirety, it takes people about 20 minutes. And that should immediately tell you something very important. We clearly don't have the full sermon. What we have is a reconstruction based on notes. Number 3 is that it was a windy day, and why is this important? Because 4 different men were assigned as note takers. That is why we have 4 accounts of the King Follett Discourse. And obviously there were no audio recordings. So what we have from the sermon is 4 men's accounts of them doing their best to write down a 2-hour sermon outdoors on a very windy day. And this is true, you can look it up. So when people quote one line or a cherry-picked section as if it's a verbatim theological statement, that is already pretty shaky ground. And 4, which is the part that really gets me, the King Follett Discourse is arguably the most cited Joseph Smith sermon on the internet, and yet it is the most unread. People love citing it or bringing it up, but they don't read the entire thing. Because if they actually read it all the way through, they would notice something very inconvenient to their argument. You know, the part where Joseph Smith continuously teaches of the eternal nature of God. This is in the same sermon where people argue that Joseph Smith is teaching that God was fully man, not God at all. This sermon does not teach that God was just some guy like one of us, but that God is eternally divine and eternally existent. And that nuance matters. And obviously nuance disappears as soon as people cherry pick. But finally, and this is the bottom line, the King Follett Discourse is not canonized scripture, nor is it binding doctrine, and it doesn't define LDS belief. So using it to debunk Mormonism doesn't really work. And trust me, it says more about the type of critical thinker you are when your criticism of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints rests solely on uncanonized scripture and doctrine from the church. And trust me, if you're wanting to truly criticize the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there is plenty of canonized scripture to engage with. But the King Follett Discourse, it's not the slam dunk people think it is.
I commend your search for the truth. I commend your looking into these things. Please keep doing so. After all, the truth will set you free.